MARCELINE went from 415 to 420. In Mertens went from 30 to 32. Jake the Dog went from 38 to 40. Ice King went from 72 to 78. Princess Bubblegum went from 30 to 33. Lumpy Space Princess is still at 74. Lady RAINICORN went from 429 to 419. BMO went from 27 to 26. The common DELOREAN is still at 20. The rare went from 38 to 46. The ultra rare went from 215 to 239. Marty's hoverboard went from 45 to 49. Pitbull hoverboard went from 159 to 161. Question mark went from 44 to 42. No tag went from 13 to 15. Rising Sun went from 24 to 23. Eduardo Risso went from 3,000 to 3,400. Joe Madureira went from 200 to 219. Becky Cloonan went from 390 to 395. Todd McFarlane went from 815 to 799. Jim Lee the Joker went from 240 to 253. Infantino Robin went from 950 to 940. Dick Sprang the Joker 268 to 282. Jason Fabuk went from 107 to 105. Dick Sprang Batman went from 100 to 105. Brian Bolland Penguin went from 333 to 379. Amanda Connor Batman went from 715 to 699. Bruce Tim Harley Quinn went from 208 to 212. Jim Lee Nightwing went from 940 to 985. Jay Lee Batman is still at 220. Gary Frank Batman went from 103 to 110. Darwin Cookie Batman went from 45 to 49. Greg Capullo Batman went from 37 to 41. Frank Quitley Robin went from 46 to 43. Caped Crusader went from 66 to 70. Mike Mignola went from 279 to 289. Big Barda went from 925 to 900. Death went from 358 to 413. Harley Quinn Deluxe 2 went from 74 to 178. Starfire went from 985 to 960. Honeybud went from 178 to 235. Count Calorie went from 325 to 350. Bad Tony went from 48 to 53. Captain Cornstarch went from 60 to 72. Twilight Mothman went from 20 to 19. Bigfoot is still at 14. Yeti went from 14 to 13. Nightcrawler went from 42 to 45. Thunderbird went from 55 to 50. Nessie went from 13 to 12. Chupacabra is still at 14. Jersey Devil went from 24 to 25. Mothman is still at 23. Pogo went from 45 to 46. CTHULU went from 34 to 29. Cosmic CTHULU went from 268 to 289. Era went from 77 to 80. Supergirl went from 455 to 518. Catwoman went from 48 to 50. Batgirl went from 40 to 41. Gold Pink went from 84 to 75. Silver Gold went from 2000 to 1900. Silver went from 585 to 565. Silver Black went from 314 to 255. Choice Cuts went from 39 to 41. Backstab went from 959 to 984. Visible Neon went from 205 to 200. Red went from 69 to 99. Visible went from 149 to 177. Happy Stage went from 34 to 37. The Common Actor 1 is now at 39. The Rare Actor 1 is now at 75. Ultra Rare is now at 290. Logo Platinum went from 10,100 to 10,200. Logo went from 282 to 290. Ghost Trap went from 777 to 730. Marshmallow went from 200 to 211. Slimer went from 86 to 88. Collective Logo went from 230 to 233. GIVENCHY Beauty went from 1300 to 1700. Amelia Earhart went from 640 to 688. Cleopatra went from 820 to 930. Terry Dodson is still at 1500. Steve Park went from 6600 to 6500. Gillimarch is still at 290. Star went from 346 to 348. Gelatina is still at 12. Marina is still at 17. Tropicana went from 43 to 50. Perla went from 16 to 19. Maria went from 19 to 22. Oceania went from 11 to 12. Sirena is still at 11. Aurora went from 12 to 13. Corsica went from 180 to 194. Superman went from 565 to 610. Mayor of Townsville went from 393 to 408. Buttercup went from 73 to 75. Blossom went from 50 to 60. Mojo Jojo went from 135 to 136. Danny went from 34,900 to 41,000. Bubbles is still at 1,400. Professor Utonium went from 1,700 to 1,800. Im is still at 4,000. Lex Ross went from 58 to 49. John Tyler Christopher went from 660 to 640. Cody Young went from 49 to 47. Ed McGuinness went from 35 to 33. Eddie Garanov went from 95 to 93. Uchikaida went from 47 to 48. Ultraman went from 51 to 54. Ultraman 7 went from 88 to 85. Ultraman Ace went from 290 to 293. Logo Gold is still at 12,400. Muka went from 17 to 20. Prima Donna went from 33 to 34. Ritmo went from 950 to 945. Pogo went from 45 to 44. Dulce went from 19 to 20. Selena is still at 17. Selena went from 106 to 100. Metallo went from 199 to 198. Umo is still at 55. Pepperino went from 50 to 49.